Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell on Thursday, July 16th, 2015. And boy, I got to tell you, everybody has been asking me about what I think about what happened to Greece in the last 2 weeks, particularly in this last week with the apparent deal. And I also have to admit to you, the short answer is I don't know. I've been looking at a lot of articles about what's going on there. I do have to put as background that, like it or not, Greece indulged itself for many, many years, for quite a long time, in a lot of social programs. The working week wasn't very long. There were a lot of uh, what we would consider entitlement programs, things like this in Greece. So this is part of the problem. They did this way beyond their means, and of course, the Germans are more or less kind of the exact opposite. So there's been tension over this. But the bottom line here, folks, it looks to me like we have a very possible scenario behind all of this. And I want to read a couple of things. I'm going to probably be blogging about one of these things later this week, and that's an interview that the Greek finance minister Varoufakis, I believe that's his name, pardon me, Varoufakis, Yanis Varoufakis, gave to the New Statesman. A very revealing interview, and I'm going to be citing some of it here in just a moment. And then a rather interesting summary of events on the Huffington Post, which I'm going to read a bit from because this is what kind of outlines what may be going on behind the scenes. Um, Let me start kind of in the middle of the Huffington Post article. It states Paul Krugman put the blame squarely on Germany in a recent op-ed entitled Killing the European Project. The trending hashtag, This is a coup, is exactly right. This goes beyond harsh into pure vindictiveness, complete destruction, hear this, complete destruction of national sovereignty, and no hope of relief. It is presumably meant to be an offer Greece can't accept, but even so, it's a grotesque betrayal of everything the European project was supposed to stand for. Now, let me stop right there. Because if those of you who have the new book out, it's called The Third Way, The Nazi International, the European Union, and Corporate Fascism. If you look at the structure of the European Union as it has evolved, it's coming out of wartime plans of the Nazis. There's no doubt about this. And in that structure, in the governing structure, they propose doing a flanking maneuver, an end run around national sovereignties and therefore around national constitutions and legislatures, pardon me, by imposing a bureaucratic regulatory bureaucracy at the European level. So in other words, Greece or even Germany for that matter can pass all the laws they want to. It's that regulatory bureaucracy in Brussels that's going to dictate policy. But in turn, that policy is going to be dictated by the most powerful economy in the European Union, and by far and away, we all know that that's Germany. So let's continue. In this Huffington Post article, a few paragraphs down from that comment about Mr. Krugman, this is what it states, quote, ultimately, Germany's willingness to force Greece out of the Eurozone and Greece's unwillingness to risk the collapse of its banking system and the unknown economic consequences of a Grexit have brought Greece to its knees. In the game of chicken between the two nations, Greece blinked first. German Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble, long the creditor's most powerful hardliner, insisted until the end that Greece be temporarily forced out of the monetary union. That put, listen carefully, that put Hollande and Eurozone leaders in the position to play good cop in negotiations. They pushed the parties to keep Greece in the Eurozone, but on more onerous terms than ever before. In other words, the terms imposed on Greece now are harsher than the terms that were rejected by Greece prior to the last election, which of course elected Syriza and Tsipras's government. All right. So let's go further down in the Huffington Post article. If Tsipras' government does collapse, it will be by design. Even before Greece's July 5th referendum, European leaders openly mused about their desire to force Syriza from power. They have long decided to make an example of Greece, to show that European citizens can elect governments with an anti-austerity agenda, but Germany and Europe's wealthy countries will be able to dictate what those governments can actually do and whether they can stay in power. The German government argues that a bailout deal is consistent with European ideals of democracy and sovereignty. But in a press briefing in Washington on Monday, Peter Wittig, the German ambassador to the United States, admitted that the broader sovereignty of the European Union sometimes contradicts the wishes of voters in individual Eurozone states. And there it is, folks, right out in raw, glaring detail. In other words, it's just what I told you. In that kind of system where the bureaucracy in Brussels can outflank and short circuit the local national legislature, this means that the bureaucracy will always be reflective of the interests of the most powerful economy in the EU, and that's going to be Germany, followed closely by France. Now, the United States has done precious little to support Greece or the principle of democracy in Europe, and here comes the reason why. The Soviet Union may be gone, but U.S. reluctance to intervene stems largely from its desire to keep Germany as a strong ally while the U.S. wages a proxy war in Russia in the Ukraine. Okay? So, in other words, the bottom line here is all of this is supposedly about, as far as the United States is concerned about keeping Germany happy and therefore keeping the EU firmly lined up behind American policy in the Ukraine. So in other words, we have what I have been talking about in my most recent book, an example of German blackmail diplomacy. That's at least one way to parse it. However, listen to this. In the article that I'm going to be blogging about probably tomorrow or Saturday, the Greek finance minister, again, his name is Yanis Varoufakis. The Greek finance minister says two very interesting things, I think. And the first is, in answer to this question, is there no alternative power within the group? In other words, within the Euro group, can the French counter that power? In other words, Germany is dictating all of these things to Greece, and now he's being asked, can the French counteract that power? And here's Varoufakis' answer. Listen carefully. Only the French finance minister has made noises that were different from the German line, and those noises were very subtle. You could sense he had to use very judicious language to be seen, not to oppose. And in the final analysis, when Doc Schäuble responded and effectively determined the official line, the French foreign minister in the end would always fold and accept. Next question. Let's talk about your theoretical background and your piece on Marx in 2013 when you said, quote, a Greek or Portuguese or an Italian exit from the Eurozone would soon lead to a fragmentation of European capitalism, yielding a seriously recessionary surplus region east of the Rhine and north of the Alps. In other words, Germany would go into recession, while the rest of Europe would be in the grip of vicious stagflation. Who do you think would benefit from this development? A progressive left that will rise phoenix-like from the ashes of Europe's public institutions? Or the Golden Dawn Nazis, the assorted neo-fascists, the xenophobes, and so on? I have absolutely no doubt which of the two will do best from a disintegration of the Eurozone, unquote. And that again is Varoufakis commenting about the potentialities of a collapse. Please note what he just told you, neo-fascists. And again, folks, I try and point this out in the new book. The structure of the current European Union is almost an exact match for the IG Farben Nazi Party plans for a European Union that were first announced in 1942 in a book published in Berlin. So, folks, this is very, very serious stuff. Now, listen to Varoufakis responding to his own quotation in this interview. He says, well, look, I don't believe in deterministic versions of history. Syriza now is a very dominant force. If we manage to get out of this mess united and handle properly a Grexit, it would be possible to have an alternative. But I'm not sure we could manage it because managing the collapse of a monetary union requires a great deal of expertise, and I'm not sure we have it here in Greece. Now, let's cut to the chase here, folks. What I think is really going on here, and you'll notice that the real dance was not so much between the Eurozone and Greece, but it was between the Eurozone, Greece, and France. And France is next in line. And what one person emailed me was the scenario that this was as much about Germany sending messages to France as to who is really the boss in this system. And I have to agree with that individual. If you go back and look at the way, folks, that the European Eurozone emerged out of the old exchange rate mechanism, there were a series of conflicts, currency conflicts, between Germany and France. And of course, in the end, French attempts to dictate fiscal and economic policy to the German Bundesbank ended in failure. So when the Eurozone came about, it was kind of as a stalemate between Germany and France, weighted on the German side. But now we're seeing the chickens come home to roost. Now, if I were Greece, and more specifically, if I were Italy and Spain, I'd be looking at this whole thing very carefully and with an eye to improving relationships with Russia and Brazil and India, Argentina, and China. And the reason is eventually what's happening to Greece is going to shift westward to Italy and then to Spain. And in that case, it's going to become much more apparent as to who's in the driving seat in Europe and why. So I'd be talking to those countries and pre-planning a potential exit from the European zone unless more weight within the councils of Europe are given to national legislatures and popular will. This is the bottom line, folks. It's either the corporations and the banks or the popular will. That's it for me for this week's news and views from the Nefarium. I'll see everybody on the flip side, and God bless everybody.